including the one morning live, and also a new author, newly published author and speaker.
Awesome. And Susan,
Hi everyone. I'm Susan. I'm a journalist at the BBC. I work on the 24-hour news channel, so that's across world news and domestic news. And I report a bit, and I also sort of produce a lot of content that you see there.
Fantastic. Fabulous. So we've got to know what you do, but we want to understand exactly what that looks like. So very quick icebreaker question that Jasmine will throw over to you to get us thinking.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for introducing yourselves. I'm really excited about today's session. So our first kind of, to kick us off, could you please tell us in 3 words, like how you sum up your career? So it might be squiggly or fulfill, like anything that you feel fits. Again, Lauren, could you kick us off, please?
So 3 words. I've chosen fulfilling, aligned, and testing. Do you want me to explain like why those words? Fulfilling in the sense that there are sirens. Fulfilling in the sense that there's so much amazing work to be done when you get to choose who you work with, how you work, and be included on projects that mean a lot to you. And that is something that I've been really, really lucky to have as a freelancer so far. Aligned, because I think it is definitely aligned with my purpose, why I'm here, what I'm supposed to be doing on this planet at this time. And testing in the sense that there are challenges, but they're things that I'm definitely learning to embrace about the process and about creating and working with creative individuals as well.
I love that. Thank you so much. Dominic, can we have you next, please?
Yeah, I would say it's exciting, challenging, and fulfilling also, as Lauren said. Exciting because, you work on a freelance sort of project basis, so every project's different. It takes you to different places. It gives you constant new challenges in terms of the projects that you're on, the requirements for each, and the people that you work with, all of that sort of stuff. It makes it really enjoyable, really exciting. It's still incredibly fulfilling because although it's hard work and long hours and all of the above, as everyone here would know in the creative industry, you do get a huge sense of fulfillment from seeing your project completed at the end and going live and putting out there to the public. So yeah, that's what I think.
Thank you. Yeah, fulfilling seems to be a very good one. Thank you. Susan, could you please sum up your career in 3 words for us?
I've gone for inquisitive, resilient, and impactful. And I think inquisitive because I am a journalist, and I spoke to a bunch of young kids the other day and I said, I'm just nosy. That's really what it is. And I think resilience, I've sort of moved around. I was a creative access employee. I worked at ITV on more of the shiny sort of X Factor shows. And now I'm in journalism. And I think you need a sense of sort of, for me, I think that just does show some resilience and sort of, especially when you're moving industry, and impactful because the work I do currently, it's, you get tweeted about it, people ask you about it, and you see that sometimes that actually does, particularly if you work on a story that is personal to you. You have contributors come and thank you for it. So I think that's why impactful is a right word for me.
Thank you. And also, I love the inquisitive/nosy word. That's great. Thank you. And finally, Ashley, please.
Sure. So varied. I really love that I have a range of work that I now do. So there's this sort of tier of news, which is my staff job. So I report for BBC News, and that is very much investigative. It requires a lot of research. It's very unglamorous. If anyone here has any sort of experience working in current affairs, it is very research heavy, often building up, taking a long time to build up relationships with vulnerable contributors, going to spaces that are sort of underserved, hard to reach. So that's one part which I find really fulfilling. And then there's another part which is more the presenter's bag of what I do, which is, you're given scripts, you don't necessarily do the research. They send cars to pick you up. And it's a lot more personality reliant. Reporting isn't really about your personality, whereas I think presenting a daytime show or co-presenting a daytime show requires that more amicable, personable approach. And then, you know, I'm now a writer and a speaker, and I'm courted by all sorts of organizations. So varied, basically, because there's a lot of different sort of bits that I do. Dynamic because a lot of what I do is you know, it can have impacts, like Susan was saying about her work. You know, if you do get a story that resonates with audiences, it can be really dynamic. And finally, I have got thoughtful, because I get to think, and that is not to be taken for granted. You know, what I love about so much of the creative jobs that, you know, this panel does, that hopefully many of you will be doing or go on to do, is you get the opportunity to think, to generate ideas, to be curious, to form opinions. And a lot of work doesn't rest on that. In a lot of works, you are outputting, you're being told what to do. And I love that I'm in a sector where I actually have to think up ideas and have views and yeah, generate thought.
Brilliant. And it's so varied as well. Like there is definitely some industry or discipline crossover in this panel, but all of your experiences and your roots in and your skills are really, really different to each other, which is really exciting. I'm going to keep the conversation going with Ashley, because we're going to move on to the next portion of the conversation where we're going to get to learn about campaigns in a bit more detail. I always feel like on these panel sessions, people kind of talk about like the glory moments, but you don't really get to learn about how things came together. So we did actually ask each of the panelists to think about a particular campaign or a project that they've been working on that they're really proud of or really excited by. So I'm going to throw it straight across to you, Ashley, because I know that you've got something in mind, and then we're going to tease out a bit more detail.
It's a hard question, you know, because I feel, again, because of the variety of what I do, there's so much I want to talk about.
I know.
And actually, typically I would talk about BBC work, but I'm actually going to talk about my book, which did emanate from a BBC bit of work. So in 2022, I presented and produced and originated a BBC Three documentary about siblings in the care system. So I am care experienced. I grew up in care. I was fostered, moved around a bunch of times between different families. But I didn't know that I had siblings. And it was only in my mid-20s that I learned that I had brothers and sisters. And I bumped into one for the first time in real life during COVID. Won't go into it because we ain't got time. But me encountering my brother for the first time sparked a lot of questions about siblings in the care system and how we're treated and how our relationships are facilitated by the authorities. And that led to a documentary. We did a big sort of nationwide FOI into sibling groups and whether they were estranged, connected. And it led to this really deep in humanity, heartfelt documentary about siblings in care. And it did really well. It went out on BBC Three, did well on iPlayer, but that led to me getting offered a book deal, which is what my campaign, my thing to talk about. And Hodder, the publisher, and I know that there are some former CA interns who have gone to work with Hodder, but they wanted me to, yeah, shout out. They wanted me to write a book about care. And it was actually quite hard to process that because it's so personal, my story, obviously, and it's traumatic. It's really traumatic. And part of my approach to my trauma is to keep it moving, build your life, be aspirational. But a book would require me to look back. It would require me to sit in some quite deep traumatic moments. And also what specifically was I going to talk about in a book, right? I'd never thought about writing a book before. Anyway, I said that I was going to write a book about the first 18 years of my life. So it's kind of a memoir, but it's more story of my time in care, shining a light on some of the issues, be that education, you know, how a local authority works, the different placements, foster care, etc., but in a really human kind of format and human storytelling. And actually, I wanted to center it on my child's voice. So I'm writing from the perspective of being a child. So that was kind of the idea. And then I spent 9 months just writing. and that was quite solitary. And please do rap me if I need to rap, because I could talk for ages. But I signed a book deal to write about my time in care called Looked After, and then it was 9 months of writing, just free writing about what I remembered, and that was quite solitary and isolating, actually, and having to remember a lot of that stuff of my childhood. And then you kind of deliver your first manuscript, which for me was over 70,000 words. You deliver it to the publisher, to the editors, to the lawyers, to the whole publishing team. And I didn't really know much about publishing, so that was quite a daunting prospect, to have your life and your thoughts kind of edited by people that I don't frankly know. And then yeah, it was like a year and a bit of it being edited back and forth with, actually, I had a really good editor, Rupert Lancaster, who is the head of nonfiction for Hodder. And then it went to legals, because I was talking about local authorities and real people who were still alive. There was, of course, some things that were quite libelous, and we didn't want to get sued, so I had to work out pseudonyms, changing place names and locations. So all in all, it was 2 years of the writing and publishing process. It came out in June 2013, and it's really hard to know how to articulate how it's been since. I mean, the PR for it was immense. I do have a level of public profile because I present and report, but certainly I wasn't confident in that as a tool to promote a book.
Yeah.
The PR went far beyond what I expected. So Fern Cotton had me on a podcast to talk about it. And sort of the mum demographic from her audience just lapped up the book. And then so there's a thing where a book can go serial, which is basically where a magazine or a paper might buy a few thousand words of a book. In the Times magazine committed to paying for 3,000 words of my book.
I saw that. That's incredible.
It was, honestly, it was, and you know, front cover was Naomi Campbell. So I was like, rah, I'm in the same magazine as her. And actually the response to it going serial was incredible. It hit a completely different audience. And then the BBC bought into it, so we got 5 Live pushing it. We got a good slot on Radio 4 Saturday morning live, a bit of TV Sunday morning live on BBC One, and there's just all sorts of parts of media kind of buying into the book. And since then, festivals. I was in Stratford-upon-Avon, Shakespeare's hometown, on Sunday night promoting the book, doing over 100 people paid for tickets to hear me talk about my book, which still, when I get invited to events and I get to speak to audiences, and especially audiences that don't appear to be anything like me, you know, older middle class people in these rural parts of the country, I'm always a bit flawed. I just don't assume people want to hear me speak. So that was a moment. And on the day that I went there, you also had Vanessa Feltz promoting her book, and Richard Coles, who's like a well-known vicar, I believe. So just, you know, these really surreal moments, like being in a green room with those guys, going out to an audience of people, and then doing book signings and having the book sell out. And there's just been a lot of reaction to the book. And Wes Streeting, the health secretary, read it.
Yes.
And he slid into my DMs, just random, you know. And his point, that he made a point on Twitter. He said, "This has really got me thinking about the outcomes of care leavers from a health perspective." To know that he read my book and it provoked that sort of thought, yeah, again, was a moment. Gordon Brown, former PM, his wife Sarah Brown, equally slid into my DMs. She read my book, and she's now invited me to do a reading of the book at her charity event. She runs a very well-known children's charity called Their World, and I'll be doing that alongside some A-list actors and her husband, Gordon Brown.
Ashley, this is such an incredible arc of where, you know, the nugget of an idea, or, you know, one thing, a really great idea and a topic that's highly relatable can just take off. I also want to know a little bit more about, like, did you feel prepared for any part of that process? Like, obviously,
No.
you know, your first connection with Creative Access was as an intern, and your journey has been, you know, so winding and you know, great achievements until now. But you know, as you said, you've got things like presenting and you know, building programs under your belt. Was there any part of that skill set, the things that you'd built up over those years, that did prepare you for any of this stuff?
So in its entirety, no. But actually, it's a good question, because there were moments that I felt somewhat prepared for. So
Mm.
you write a book, and you kind of think the book, just writing the book itself, is such a hustle. It is such a mission. And I expected that I'd write it and I'd kind of just chill. The real work kicks off if the book's going to do well when the book's published. And so the PR, for example, there was like a week where I was just jumping from, like, it was Times Radio podcast, Nihao Arthur Nike on Radio 5 Live, the Radio 4 show. And it was literally like I had a great team. So cars were just taking me places. I was jumping on trains, but I was shattered. And it was really challenging to be, you know, best foot forward, present and talk about your trauma and think about the audience that you're trying to communicate. But my career really helped me.
But could you have imagined towards the beginning, or when you were interning, or in those early days, that this is where it would lead?
No, I mean, it's quite weird, because I got my internship a decade ago, and that might seem like a long time, but I don't think it is for what I'm doing now. Yeah, no, I couldn't have imagined. And so shout out to CA, by the way, because actually it was that getting into broadcasting, getting a job, getting an internship, sorry, and then getting a job, that really kind of that's led to this fruition of opportunity. Last thing I'll say on CA is I was pushed to go for an online job, so a job with BBC News Online, and so many people were going for it. And I remember they interviewed me, and one of the interviewers, she kind of chimed back with CA and said, he's more of a broadcaster. I don't think he's a fit for the online team. I think he should be a reporter. I didn't know this at the time. And through working with CA, what happened is that they actually changed the job for me to work for the BBC News channel in broadcasting.
Wow.
I just think that bespoke offering of support is just not to be underrated or underestimated. That actually just seeing my skill set, believing that, all right, that opportunity specifically may not have been for me, but he deserves to be at the BBC. Eternally grateful to Josie and the team for the fact that that foresight and that sensitivity was there to get me to actually create a role for me, you know. And yet that those formative years and days have been critical to where I am now and where I go. Because
I mean, guys, you're making this so easy for me. You're just talking about endless examples of Black excellence, and also signposting really, really useful advice for others who are potentially just starting out and looking at your journeys. Just brilliant, and so generous of you to share all of that, all of the inside bits of the glam and the not glam of actually bringing a book to life. Absolutely love that. I'm going to bring up Susan next. Very similar industry, and I know that you actually know Ashley, because you also used to work at Creative Access, and like there's just so many wonderful connections in the group. I want to throw over to you to talk to us a little bit about, you know, campaigns and things that you're really proud of.
I'm actually glad he didn't talk about broadcasting, because why would I be here? But Ashley Ashley says, and I'm going to say quickly, Ashley says that, you know, he didn't know. But I think a lot of us had seen Ashley and knew that Ashley's going to do something amazing. And even my mum was always asking, you know, that young man who used to sing in Hilton, how is he doing?
Oh, let's not talk about that.
Yes, it's also many talents, this Ashley. You know, Google.
That's my cue. Bye, guys.
So you know, I did start off at CA, and that was through a head of television at the time, Patrick Young, the first Black head of television at BBC News. And he was like, you know, there's this organization called Creative Access. And so I applied, and I didn't even realize it wasn't an internship. I just sort of applied, and then I was sitting in front of Josie a few weeks later. So that was actually phenomenal, because I think previous to that, I had left uni and I didn't really know anyone in the media. I knew I wanted to be in this space, but I couldn't have told you except your famous faces. I didn't have that link. And so to step in an organization that at the time was working with, I want to say sort of over 100, maybe two, organizations placing interns, it was probably the best time for me because I learned, I had a privileged position to see, I guess, how the organization worked, the employers worked, and also what the interns were looking for. And so I was able to meet fantastic people like Ashley and many, many others who've gone on to do so much. And that's really become my network as well, which is, I think, is also important part of this story as well, that, your network is your net worth. So, my friend here is now a soon to be an award-winning publisher, and many others, and Dom and others. So I feel really privileged to actually be part of this community. And something I was, I guess, very keen to talk about is has something to do with another intern, actually. So I've moved, I guess, in journalism only the last 3 or 4 years since the pandemic. Sort of 2019, I was like, I really want to go back to my roots. And I think in uni, I used to go around to African embassies and film things for them. And that was something I was always keen to do. But somehow I found myself at CA and then ITV from that. But I knew I wanted to go back into news. And so in 2019, I sort of got back into news, applied for a role at BBC, which, believe it or not, it's one of the most weirdest systems to get into. So, and you don't even know, you sort of get in and you're like, this is such a weird space to be in. But I came from a very different background. And at the time, I just thought, I've seen my colleagues do it. I've seen many of, even in the building, there were many ex-CA people as well. So I think those people sort of really encouraged me to sort of set foot in it. And I think the last 3 or 4 years have been phenomenal, right? Peaks and valleys, but quite interesting. And I think one of the most important, I think, sort of impactful moments for me was actually very recently with the phase 2 of the Grenfell Tower out. And if anyone knows, obviously there was a massive fire in London in 2017 where 72 people tragically lost their lives. And actually one of those people was one of our creative access interns, Khadija Sayed. And Khadija was a friend of mine. She had an internship not about 10 minutes away from here at Pier. And she was a photographer, phenomenal photographer. And her work was being shown in Venice. Khadija, at the time, she was on her way up. We were like, Khadija's that girl. She's about to make it. We were rooting for her. And when that happened, I remember actually being in the office in the BBC. At that time, I was working with commissioners on the 7th floor, just before I'd entered news. So I sort of snuck in and then got into news. But anyway, and from actually our floor, you could see, because we're in West London, we could see the smoke. And it was just such a fascinating, you can't comprehend what was going on.
Yes.
I remember sort of texting Josie and saying, it's one of our interns, because I was still connected. I mean, I love this organization. So I remember connecting, like, you do know that. And we were talking back and forth. And to be sort of 3 or 4 years later, reporting on it, and not just reporting on it, but producing the OB, what we call an outside broadcast, for 2 days on this, pushing for us to do 2 days on it, was such a sort of round, sort of, you sort of, I guess you go back round, what's the word I'm looking for? The phrase I'm looking for, but that, where you sort of
strange full circle moment, or interconnectedness.
I went from the 7th floor as an assistant up there to now coming down to what we call the pit. If you're ever in MBH, and if you ever want to come, please hit me up in the pit. And now I'm standing outside the Grenfell Tower, and I'm in charge of looking after a crew of about 30 people, and we're reporting sort of 10 hours of television over 2 days, 10 hours on the first day and 10 hours over the second day. And I just thought, this is quite incredible. Like, it's surreal as well. And I wasn't able really to go to that tower beforehand, I think, for obvious reasons. It was a tough loss, actually. And to be there and to see just how impactful even her work is. BBC has gone on to do lots of documentaries on her, so if you look her up, you'll see. But it was incredible because she was one of my inspirations. Like many people on our team, you look at your peers, your Black peers, and you're like, oh, this person's doing this, and I can do it too. And I think for me, that was so, as I said, a full circular moment, but also the work that we were doing was so important. And as the person in charge, I was in charge of all the guests that came on. And I was in charge of hearing and listening and reading a lot of the witness reports at the time. So you're in contact with families and friends who've lost ones, and you're trying to hear their voices. You're also in charge of sort of talking to the, you know, I guess talking to the lawyers and making sure you don't go too much off beat. But you're talking to the politicians involved. You're talking to former councillors involved. You're talking also to experts around this field. And I think it was a moment where you step back and you're like, oh, wow, like somehow, in a way, like you're still honoring your friend's legacy and you're still honoring CA's legacy. And I was actually really happy that I got it. And I have to be honest, I think sometimes even small things as a journalist that we don't, you know, sometimes my colleagues may not or may overlook, you know, just making sure that, so I grew up in a council home. I grew up very similar to Khadija. Like I never thought that I couldn't do something, even though I didn't know people in this field. But I remember being in the office and somebody saying, this is 2017 when it happened, like, oh, people like that people who live there don't work here. And like, I don't think they understand. I think you're not understanding what's going on. And then now to be in a place where not only am I service or, you know, trying to, I guess, tell the stories of people like that, but also my experts were all Black educated lawyers, Black educated people in their field, and just showing that as well, because I think it's important, because there was, you know, you start looking at what we were trying to do, and you know, you get into, you know, and I guess that's why representation matter. You could have done that story, and you could have had the faces be Black and brown people who passed away in their families, and then the experts are only white middle class people. And actually, I remember being like, no, guys, this is not how we're going to do the story, because this is not even how London looks, and West London doesn't look like that. And to be honest, people in this building have grown up like a Khadija. We need to make sure we honor that, and we need to honor that these people, you know, that we are all sort of, we can, you know, high low wherever we are. And I think for me, that was just so important. And it wasn't just, you know, that was sort of running this, and it was fantastic. You know, I know, God, it sounds awful saying, but it was like a great piece of work. Obviously, at the same time, it's a tragedy.
And I think I just want to identify that as well. Like, we always get on panel questions, or, you know, topic wise, it brought up around, you know, what's the importance of representation, or what's the importance of representation within the creative industries, within influential positions within the creative industries. And it's that, isn't it? It's, you know, newscasters and people who are in control of who gets brought in and who leads the discussion, or who's part of the discussion, who's invited to be part of the discussion.
Absolutely. You sitting there with, you know, one of my colleagues, head of Home Affairs, and we're having real discussions about Blackness and African and Caribbean immigrants and the differences, and not just putting people all in one sort of, because, you know, you're having real honest conversations, and he's talking to me and saying, we just didn't really, and this was very honest conversations. And he was like, we were talking to politicians like a Theresa May at the time, and people in her cabinet, and they really were like, we didn't know these sort of people existed. People so disenfranchised with the system. And so I think that is why it's important for representation of people like actually like a Dom and stuff, that you can come in and say, actually, no, that's like, everyone exists. And we are in very similar spaces, because even when you go up there, and this was one of the first times I've gone up there, you know, apart from maybe a carnival where you sort of go past and you sort of see it in the background.
That's
you go in there and it's like £1 million houses, and then Grenfell Towers, and people who still live very close to it. And it's like, oh, guys, like, you know, they're going to the same shops as you, at least, right? We are in the same similar hemisphere, but you feel that detached to people. And so when I was explaining to him, I was like, you know, we're all up in your building. And I say your building, but really the BBC belongs to everyone. But the idea that you think that these that people like this, the idea anyone thinks that people like this can't exist in spaces like that, it was fascinating.
That's it.
But
I'm so pleased also that we're having this conversation during, I mean, we should be having this conversation all year round, but the fact that Black History Month is bringing us together, and it's facilitating this conversation I'm really pleased, really pleased. I'm just really pleased that this panel looks like it does. I want to bring some other folks into the conversation as well, just make sure that we've got the chance to hear about projects that are going to be completely separate to what we've already heard, because we've got next up, Lauren, who is not in the TV sector. Tell us about your project, Lauren. Oh, it's muted you, I think. There we go.
It's just been really amazing hearing from all of you guys so far. And there are some things that, as much as I want to talk about my projects and stuff as well, just to sort of piggyback off of what the other speakers have been saying, thinking about representation and what that actually looks like and what that can actually feel like to be be an individual who is doing that representing. Because I was working at the RPO, it's in the classical music space, and representation is something that is continually spoken about, but I also feel like it's not something that people really know how to do properly a lot of the time. And I think when you are an intern as well, you're taking up space, but I think the attitude sometimes of interns is that you're at the bottom because you are just starting out. But a mindset shift that I really had to sort of have was that I'm not at the bottom, I'm at the beginning of something. So it's not necessarily that I'm lower than or less than anybody around me. It's just that this is my point, or this is just where I'm at in my journey. And being able to sort of speak up about things that I thought wasn't right, or think about how certain things should be worded or phrased if we're thinking about social media, things like that. Even having conversations about Black History Month with my colleagues and being like, look, if it doesn't feel authentic, don't do it, because people can understand now, especially more than ever, when something looks like a tick box or looks like you're just doing it for show. And being able to have those conversations confidently and say, yeah, like that's actually what I think, despite being an intern. I think that is part of the real power that comes from, I mean, creative access comes from individuals like the other speakers here, taking up that space and making your voice heard in rooms where we're not expected to be, or even really invited to be a lot of the time.
It's also really important that everyone has the context as well, that you are an intern or, you know, completed your internship, but you are also someone who was well established in another industry and you switched careers. So you overcame, you know, lots of different things. So do you think that also helped give you a voice, or helped give you the confidence to have a voice?
I think so. I think because I was working in education, I was teaching for about 4 years, and I'd always done creative pieces on the side. It was never sort of the main thing that I was focused on. But having the opportunity to study and also having the opportunity to work creatively as a freelancer, that was something that it appealed to me because it would just open up that space to sort of pursue more creative things. And I think the teaching, because you are presenting a lot of the time anyway, you have to convince loads of tiny people that what you're saying is the most important thing a lot of the time, and keep focus and keep people sort of motivated to listen to you and understand you. That is definitely a transferable skill that I developed whilst teaching, which has been like amazingly useful when working in marketing. I think that the education space creates some really amazing people. And there are so many people that are in education, they understand the issues that exist within the education sector. And a lot of them, they might have other passions and hobbies outside of their teaching jobs, but having the sort of courage to sort of step away from that and be like, well, actually, I want to pursue that thing. I want to sing, or I want to dance, or I want to act, or I want to do whatever it is. It takes a lot. And I think sometimes you do just need to dig deep. You're not always going to have someone telling you that, yeah, you can do it. I'm very lucky to have family members that do support me and do really encourage me to do what it is that I want to do. But not everyone does have that. So you do really have to dig deep a lot of the time. And it doesn't always, how do I say it? Even the encouragement sometimes of other people, it isn't always enough. Like that's sort of where you have to tap into those reserves and really like say that, yeah, like I'm going to do whatever it is that I'm going to do, and I'm really going to push myself forward. That's sort of the main thing.
That's brilliant. We're going to just making everyone who's dialed in aware, we're going to go over to questions in about 10 minutes, but we do want to just make sure that we've all had a chance to hear about projects. So Lauren, tell us about the one thing that you were going to bring us in on, and then I definitely want to hear from Dominic. I've got so many questions about the films.
Amazing. So at the moment, I've been working alongside this amazing artist called Charisse. She is a sort of jazz soul singer.
Oh, I love her.
Okay. And she's phenomenal, and she's just created this platform and showcase called Shade Indigo, which essentially represents the unrepresented within music. People who sound a little bit alternative, people who make jazz, soul music that doesn't sound like the conventional jazz, soul music that we are used to listening to. And I've been working alongside her, helping her with her marketing, and also helping to sort of bring the showcases together. And that's been a really amazing experience, because I came in on the marketing tip, but there's a lot of events planning and other sorts of things, and artist care, artist development, like there's so much going on there. And because I've already worked with artists before on the side when I was teaching, I have all the skills and the know-how to get that job done. So it has been really, really amazing. We have got a showcase coming up on the 5th of November. So if you are available, if you are free, please do come through. It's at 91 Living Room in Brick Lane, right in the heart of Brick Lane. So if you are available, please do come down.
Fantastic. And so that might be for London Jazz Festival as well, right? Or it's timed for that?
Yeah, it's around that sort of time, yeah.
Incredible. I do actually have a signed vinyl from Charisse, so that's why I'm so invested.
Oh, amazing. That's so wonderful.
She's incredible. Dominic, I'm obsessed with all of the films that MARV has been responsible for putting out in the world, like some real like legacy building, award-winning films. Please tell us what you're willing to tell us about the projects that you can talk about, or what you're really proud of.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably useful for me to speak a bit about one project early on that I was very, very proud of, and how that kind of led to where I am now. So, I started as an intern on Kick-Ass 2 back in 2012. Working in the production office there, but I was kind of filtered through lots of different departments. They, similar to what Ashley explained. Once I was there, they kind of saw where the qualities, that I had maybe best placed, and kind of tried to filter me through. So you end up with a bit of a baptism of fire into how filmmaking works, and especially in the independent world where it's all hands on deck. Although Kick-Ass 2 was a big sort of £20 million film, I think, something like that. In the grand scheme of movie making, that's some of the more humble budgets, and with MARV being an independent producer, it was it was very much handled in that way. But I managed to get my feet under the table and show my value, with the limited experience that I have. I think, again, speaking to what Lauren mentioned, it's important when you do come into these internships that you do try and hold on to the fact that you are just at the beginning of a journey, as you said, as opposed to you're just no one, and you're just there to make tea and coffee, and you don't know anything, and just you're almost broken down. People try and push you back into your box, and that can be quite diminishing to your confidence and your future aspiration. So I tried my best to hold on to that, maintain my character. Fortunately, the producers took to that, and they saw that, and they took me on to their next project, which was a Bruce Parry documentary, which was about the very sort of hippie style called Tawai, Into the Rainforest. And it was about reconnecting with the more natural remedies to, modern life's issues and problems, So we went to Colombia and did ayahuasca, and we were in an ayahuasca retreat for 6 or 7 weeks or whatever, in sweat lodges. And we went to Malaysia and was there for 4 weeks, and was in the rainforest there, to India. We did a tour around the UK. That was a real kind of eye-opener. That's definitely a project that I was very, proud of, or proud to be a part of, because it was with people that, are nothing like me, although in the feature world, people are very different anyway from where I've come from. I'm from Southeast London. I've made my way out to Pinewood somehow, 2-hour journey. And I get there, and then there's someone who's just driven over from Marlow, or whatever. And I don't even know where these places are. All I know is the M25, everything that's inside of that, So there wasn't anyone that kind of looked like me or acted like me. So to kind of still be given these opportunities and seen as equal to some extent, was a big boost for me and of big value. So going onto that project again and sort of seeing a bit of the world and how things work was a big eye opener. But maintaining that character and that belief, like what I was saying at the beginning, has sort of gone full circle for me now, where the most recent project that I'm on at the moment, a MARV feature again called Stuntman. I can't speak too much about what that film is, but it's a really exciting feature, and it led to us shooting a promo with Meta, Facebook Meta in San Francisco, and that was using their Ray-Ban Meta glasses, and we had to create this stunt action piece with them about how the glasses work and whatever. It's online to be seen now. So then to be carried onto that project, but now be one of the HODs, and just be, let go and just look, this is what we're trying to do. You do your thing and just go, That for me, I was very proud of that, and I'm still very proud of it, because that is a full circle moment where I've gone from being just, a trainee, an intern, a production assistant, tea, coffee, carrying luggage, whatever, to now being a head of a department and carrying, a massive project through to delivery.
Does it shape how you empower your teams, Dominic? Like coming up through that process and grafting and like starting out as an intern, does it alter like what you put in place for your team to help them thrive, and just things that you're aware of, perhaps because you can put yourself in their shoes?
Yeah, it definitely does. With what it is that with these projects, they're all such tight budgets and tight schedules. Though on paper it's millions of pounds, what you're given is very small. So the people within them are always under a lot of pressure and time constraints. There's not always they don't make a lot of time to give you, the teaching or the lessons that you need. It's more kind of just watch me and learn and get on with it sort of thing. But I go out of my way to try and make time and sit with people and really bring them up to speed, talk them through whatever they need, not just assuming that they know, or they can pick up from what I'm saying, and take those lessons. It's what do you want to do? Where do you actually want to go in the future, and let me kind of help to guide you. It may be guiding you out of my department completely, but at least I'm helping you on your journey forwards, in the best way possible. And I think I even only had that very late on in my career, really. Working for MARV was fantastic, and Matthew Vaughan, although it was a slightly distant relationship, was always very supportive of what I was doing, and all the producers that work under him were always very supportive. But there wasn't really a hands-on kind of sit down and let's work this out for you, and let me help you get to where you want to go. It's more kind of we're on this journey and come with us, But once I got to work on Jurassic World, the last Jurassic World, I met one of the first Black HODs that I come across in 10 years by that point, a guy called Mark Harris.
For the uninitiated, what's a HOV?
HOD, head of department, sorry. So I was the production coordinator, post-production coordinator at that point, and Mark Harris was the post-production supervisor. And kind of, to walk in and be interviewed by a Black man from, an area similar to mine who looked like me, and it was mind-blowing. It's like, literally like seeing a unicorn. If I hadn't seen that, and I still haven't seen it, this day I've only worked with 5, maybe 6 people of color directly, within my departments, before I've had a chance to hire myself, obviously. There is still a big issue there, but Mark really took me under his wing and sort of, gave me that time and sat me down and said, look, you've been in the industry a long time, let's see what it is that you're still missing. Where are the gaps in your knowledge, and let's work that through. Come and sit with me here, come into this meeting, come with me there. I have a lot to thank him for that, and that kind of showed me that it is possible to achieve and get to the top, but still be helpful to people that are beneath you. Remember that you came on that same journey, and it's important to give that back.
Definitely. We're going to throw over to audience questions in just a couple minutes, but Jasmine's got a really good question just to eke out a little bit more of your brilliance. So I'm going to throw it over to her.
Yeah, so thanks, Ella. And thank you so much, everyone. It's been so interesting hearing you talk. But I think my question is because obviously, Dominic, you've been talking about like long hours and it being like a challenging role as well. And all of you have kind of talked about the challenges that you faced, and Lauren as well, you talked about the need to kind of dig deep and motivate yourself. But I'm wondering whether you have any kind of creative rituals or like habits of like in the moments when you're kind of stuck or struggling that you can kind of use or fall back on to remotivate yourself and kind of reinvigorate your like creativity or yeah.
Yeah, I'll jump in with that. For me, it's I find that magic in silence. In modern world today, where there's so much noise and so many things, and distractions and everything else, it's hard to kind of get those moments of silence to really concentrate and think a problem through or a creative issue through. So when I am stuck like that, I go for long walks, and I won't, my phone will be off, or just I'll keep it in my pocket, whatever, and I'll just think my issue through or think my problem through, or I'll set my alarm early. It's made slightly easier for me now. I've got a newborn at home. I just had my second daughter recently, so she helped me with the early morning. But before that, if I had a real creative issue or a real technical problem that I need to think through again, I'll set my alarm for maybe 4:30. Wake up in that time where there's silence, no one else is up, no one's around, and I can really just focus. I can give it my full attention and think things through, and I find a real power in that. I got that from Steve Jobs, actually. Reading his autobiography, he was a big advocate for long walks and had most of his meetings out walking. So I'd say that.
That's so interesting because for myself, I know that I like if I'm trying to look for inspiration, I'll listen to music and I'll try and fill my kind of head with as much noise and like other creative stuff as possible. So I wonder if anyone's got any kind of slightly like different or slightly different ideas. Yeah, Ashley.
Hope you don't mind putting my hand up. I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, in my sort of space at the BBC, part of the requirement creatively is to originate stories. It's, you think about the news agenda, you think about current affairs, there is always a need for news stories, and they're like buzzwords at the moment, like underserved audiences or hard to reach groups or whatever. And so there's always this pressure to have ideas, routes, lines of inquiries, issues that we can make content on, investigation ideas. And you'll scour the papers, you'll go on social, you will talk to people, as we all probably do in our own kind of relative spheres and whatever. But there is such a inspiration and power to be found in going back to your story. And I think that's an incredible source of inspiration, your own lived experience. So, Susan touched on Grenfell. In fact, the first big story I had to cover was Grenfell. And it's so weird that Susan was at the BBC buildings because I was at the foot of the tower, that morning. And the brief was get survivors to speak on air. And by the way, I had no idea that Khadija was a CA intern, that because her story was so poignant for me. And you had all these broadcasters, the Piers Morgans, the Emily Maitlisses, whoever, trying to get survivors to speak on their platforms. And I found that a lot of the survivors were coming to me, and I realized it was because I was more relatable. I had come from a similar walk of life. And for a long time, I was quite reluctant to bring my story, my lived experience to the BBC, because it does feel middle class most of the time. And so I just thought, growing up in care is not a flex that you really want to be, kind of wearing on your sleeve in the pit on the news floor. But then Grenfell taught me that owning who I am, being proud of that, sharing it, is such a powerful tool when it comes to connecting with stories and people groups. And, I spoke about the Siblings in Care documentary. I've done a bunch of stories rooted in lived experience. So I would say, if you ever feel like you need a bit of creativity, you need a bit of inspiration, actually, sometimes it's closer to home than you think. Sometimes the best stories, the best treatments can be rooted in your own lived experience and what you've been through. So hopefully that encourages someone.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really, really great to. Yeah, I think it's so important of like rooting yourself in your lived experience and your stories, and leads me really nicely onto like a next question, which is about the kind of role that community has played in like not only your journey, but also your kind of creative professional journeys. Susan, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that for us, please.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would call me a natural sort of networker. So, I mean, even after leaving Creative Access, I got to the BBC, I looked around on my floor. This is when I was on the 7th floor with commissioners, and I could count about 13 Black people in there. And I said, guys, yeah, our lucky 13, we need to grow, like, what are we doing? And I remember we started something called the collab, which was literally just getting all the young Black people in the building, and then from that sort of buildings around us, you know, media companies around us, and we used to just throw events, and this was all before the pandemic, so just throw parties so that people could network and get encouraged. Because I think sometimes in buildings like that, you feel, I think Ashley obviously said, but you know, you feel sort of outer, right? And you're sort of, and even though, and I always say this, I worked in a factual department at the time where actually every single person on there was working class. But when you enter a BBC building, you almost become part of the script. And you know that you feel almost like, in order for your ideas to make it, they have to be sort of formulated in a way that your higher ups, I guess, could understand. And so I remember thinking, oh, this is the real problem. It's not even that you have, because you do have some diversity in there, you do have a lot of diversity in there. But I remember thinking, it's just that you don't have a chance to have like a diversity of thought. There is no diversity of thought, because with that chicken and egg story, we keep doing the same thing, we're going to keep getting the same results. And so people don't really want to sort of break out and do things. But I think that's why having a network, people that you, especially if you're starting off, I think people that you lunch with, people not just networking above, but networking sort of next door to each other, right? Your peers, because that's where, if you don't feel confident pitching an idea, that's who you sort of go to and you can pitch together. So even now, you know, literally yesterday, I had somebody who's a director come into the BBC. I don't know if I want to do film, not something I've thought about, but you don't understand the power of having a conversation that sparks something else. And it's like, oh, this is how you guys see things. Oh, actually, this is how we see things. And there's an idea. And I think using that, not just for ideas, but also for encouragement, is so helpful, because this is an industry and a career where you're going to have peaks and you're going to have valleys. So you need to make sure that instead of sometimes isolating yourself, that you actually plug into your networks, like, and that's your social networks, your family, but also your peers, and creating that sort of for you. So that's quite, I think it's very important to me.
Really well put,
Absolutely.
Susan. I'm going to go straight to some audience questions. So I'm going to pick on Lauren because you're next up to answer a question. But also just to let all the panelists know, because they haven't been privy to all of the chat that's been going on in the background. We had a couple of people shouting Susan out because they recognize you from your CA days, and just a general huge thanks to everyone. There's been people saying that everything that you've been saying, they've specifically called you out. Lauren, Ashley, Dominic, has been really insightful, so well done. Some marketers in the room, so really useful. Questions that we've had, one is around knockbacks, which I think hopefully we can all relate to in some form, and it's just how to stay buoyant, how to stay up, and how to stay motivated when you do get industry knockbacks, whether that's you've pitched an idea, it hasn't landed or it hasn't been accepted, or whether it's something on a bigger scale, you've applied for something and you've heard a negative answer. So if we're just ending on a couple of these questions, I'll just put that one to the group first. Lauren, how would you respond?
I think that it's really important to remember that life, and not even just like your career, is just one massive learning experience. And the sooner that you become comfortable with making mistakes, the more you'll sort of get out of your journey and out of your career in general. At my time at the RPO, yeah, I made some mistakes. I will pull my hand up and say, yeah, I made some mistakes, you know? And but being in a safe environment to learn and to make mistakes is what sort of took those mistakes from being mistakes and turned them into opportunities to learn and improve and grow. And like I said before, a lot of it is about your perspective and how you look at your mistakes. Oh my gosh.
Catastrophize?
There we go. Is usually what can happen and come to your brain the first time you sort of make a misstep or make a mistake. But if you are in a safe environment, just communicating your worries, your stresses to whoever's around you, if it's your line manager, a friend, whoever, that can really help to boost you back up so that you feel confident to go back out again and try again, basically.
Incredible. Ashley, surely you've never received a knockback at all, right?
I mean, I work in news, it's daily. You know, part of my job is ideas, it's story ideas, it's getting commissions for documentaries or for online articles or whatever else. And most of the time it is a no. Just plain facts, it is a no. And I think you just have to be real. It's a word that you've probably heard on every other webinar that you've been on, if you've been on a few, but it is perpetual resilience. And always, I think there are 10 years now in broadcasting, there are things that I have to fight for. I've got to fight for my creativity. I've got to fight for my curiosity. Like, I've got to remain curious. I've got to find it within myself. You know, like, fatigue is a real thing in news. I mean, the stories have been relentless, you know, a pandemic, Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, inflation, really big domestic issues, really big foreign issues. And you just have to you've got to find a reservoir of creativity to keep going. So I'd say resilience, don't let a no be a permanent no, find new ideas, come back. And also ask for feedback. Sometimes you might get a no, but if you inquire about that no, there could be some really good data for you to take away. So actually, I try and turn no's into proper lessons now. And I think that's a really good approach to have. If you get a no, don't leave it there flatly, but actually inquire, why is it a no? What could I do to be better? And just always being teachable as well. And 10 years in, it's easy to feel like I know everything. I've got a bunch of RTS nominations, shows that I've co-presented have won awards, but actually I've still got to be teachable. You've still got to be teachable. And I think being teachable lends to good creativity.
Amazing. Dominic, I'm going to end on one with you. Susan, you might also have a perspective on this, but someone really specifically has a question on tips for breaking into film, radio, or podcasts. Perhaps you can answer all of those, but most specifically film, breaking in.
Yeah, I think breaking into film, it's become a lot easier. I'll use that word lightly, but there's more opportunity now. You know, there's even more internships, you know, available through the Screen Skills skill set. There's through equity guilds and Beck2, they run a lot of schemes as well to get people in. I think in general, it's you know, using what you have in front of you. If you can get onto IMDb, the Internet Movie Database, you might be able to scrape some cash together, pay for a month of the pro account. That straight away gives you access to people's contact details. You know, you can look people up from all of the recent films or TV shows that you like yourself. Go on there, look up who was the producer or the post supervisor or whoever, you know, whichever position it is that you're interested in, and reach out to them. You know, you'll be surprised how many people do find themselves with job opportunities just from being, you know, in contact with someone at the right time, you know, when they were looking for something. And at the worst case, you know, you at least make a contact for something later on down the line. So I think it's persistence, networking, as Susan touched on earlier. You know, go to as many networking events as you can. If you can get bursaries to help you with training, as again, skill set and Screen Skills have a lot of training schemes. Post Super is another training network now that I'm a part of. They have a lot of post-production training schemes available there as well. If you can train yourself up as best possible and then present yourself to someone, you know, it increases your opportunities again.
Nice. Yeah, I'm seeing loads more influencers sharing their editing skills for free on social media. So that's a really great shout. And you did mention some of those things you might need to pay for. We do still have the Creative Access Career Development Bursary open until the 4th of November. And that's for, somebody asked me actually, is it just £1,000 that people can access? No, there's a whole bank. So please do be encouraged. You can apply for up to £1,000 per person. You just have to meet the eligibility criteria. There's loads of information. Head to our opportunities board and you can read all of the details and guidance around what you need to consider in your application. I'm so pleased with where the discussion's gone. I really feel like we've touched on so many things. There's loads of other bits of advice that we didn't get to, you know, networking and things like that. But I'm sure that we'll look to cover that in other ways and in other content. But I just wanted to finally just firstly signpost and remind everyone, do make sure that you are either following us on social media, Creative Access, it's just @_Creative Access on all the channels. Head to our website and click on opportunities board and go through the motions to register with us. Takes a minute, but could provide multitude benefits. Huge thank you to all of you. Really powerful stories shared and like lots of vulnerability. So I really just want to say a big thank you for that. Everyone being super honest and just generous with your time. We don't underestimate how busy you all are as people coming from film, TV and marketing and all your side hustles. So just a huge thank you. Thanks everyone for dialing in. We had a really engaged audience and people calling out members of the panel specifically. So massive well done. You should be so proud of yourselves and happy Black History Month.
Thank you guys. Thank you. Really love you guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers everyone, and thanks all for dialing in. Hope you have a great rest of your week.
Bye-bye.
And you take care.